Hello, this is Mark Tucker.
And this is Alan Furstenberg, and together we are Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs. Happy New Year, Alan.
Happy New Year, Mark!
Hey.
Yay! How are you doing? How was your New Year?
Actually, pretty quiet. I don't do a lot for New Year's, but excited kind of to see how how this new year goes. Lots of things, just personally and family wise, just things are continue to move along. So happy to see what happens there, and just in work and technology, excited to see where things are going.
That's always one of the things about our industry that I both like and are kind of frustrating on some level.
Yeah,
Is it's always changing, it's always something new, it's always exciting, we're always moving, but it means we're always moving. And that can get tiring sometimes.
I love the fact, I've been doing this for 30 plus years, and I love the fact that I'm learning new things, and
Yeah,
if I would have just stuck with the COBOL programming that I learned when I was in college, um,
that
then
it would be less exciting,
yeah,
but more profitable, perhaps.
that's possibly true. But yeah, I just see all the different things I've done, spent a lot of time doing that, SQL databases, um, desktop, web, various incarnations of web, smart client. There's just so many things, and I'm just dedicated the last 7 plus years doing voice, and even things are changing. This
Always
last year
changing
has
it.
been a crazy year, so it's just been, yeah, lots. I love to learn new things, but it is sometimes crazy
Right.
how much
So
you have to
this
learn.
isn't the looking back episode. That was last week.
I
This is
know
the
it was.
looking forward episode.
Okay,
So
so
what are we excited about for 2024?
well, I think there might be some additional things happening in that small world of LLMs that we kind of heard a little bit about last year.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, probably. Yeah.
I think the pace is just going to continue with LLMs and just keep going with, new models, faster models, bigger models, more people doing models, new types of things. There's just, I think it's going to be AI. Um,
So within that, what are the things you're most excited about when it comes to LLMs this year?
so one of the
Or
challenges,
or I'd say even AI models in general this year,
yeah,
because
yeah.
I think the term LLM is now a misnomer.
Yeah. I can see that. So one of the challenges that I've had, especially with having such a passion that I do for voice assistants and voice first technology, you haven't really been able to do a lot with LLMs and voice assistants. You
Yeah.
can see them mostly in, the chatbots or text, because it just takes so long to generate responses. It's just, 6, 7, 10, 20, I don't know, depending on what you're doing, it could be a long time. So I'm looking forward to either smaller models that are better, models that are just faster, so that they can actually start to be used in voice assistants. That voice is it's more of a natural flow,
Yes.
as opposed to what it's been. So I think that's been kind of a big hindrance to LLMs in the voice world, and so I'm really going to have my eye on what happens with the latency, solving the latency issues, and just making things faster.
I agree. I would agree on that. And what I'm kind of hopeful for is that one of the things that we get out of that is a notion of generated streaming audio. So, in the past, the voice assistants that we've been using, they will take the text to turn into audio or SSML to turn into audio and process the whole thing before they send the audio.
Yeah, it's definitely the old request process response
Right.
model.
Um, One of the things though with the large language models is that they're generating their response on the fly. You
Mhm.
know, the next few characters that come out could take a moment, but you know, you can literally see them advancing on the screen sometimes. So
Yeah,
it'll be really interesting to see if streaming text to speech becomes more of a thing. You know,
yeah,
OpenAI said that their model does it, but poorly. And it doesn't have all the capabilities that we in the voice world are used to,
yeah,
like SSML, like being able to control how certain words are spoken,
yeah, yeah.
like a bunch of other things. So it'll be interesting to see um, if not just we get the less latency on the LLM side, but also less latency from the text to speech portion of that. And if we can tie the two together so that even if we don't have less latency, it feels like we have less latency.
Yeah, and I would add to like the beginning side too, things like Whisper, the automatic speech recognition (ASR) side of things, where it's doing audio to to the text or the intent. So basically you got three pieces. You got the input, you got the processing, and you got the output, right? If you can stream, and as you're saying, things are streaming and being translated, and as
Mm.
things are being translated, things are being processed, and as things are being processed, things things are being
That'll be interesting. Yeah,
streamed, out, then end to end, it's all about, can we get this end to end response? Because that's what, somebody talking with the device is going to see, is just like how is it like I'm having a conversation with somebody, or is it like I'm saying something and then I'm waiting and I'm waiting
right,
for a response, and then it's like, kind of,
right. And as an extension of that, you know, I think in the past it's been we very much the way these have been processed have been turn the speech to text, process the text.
yeah,
What if we start getting models that are more directly speech to intent, speech to context, speak, you know, that
yeah,
instead of taking text as input, take speech as input. And how does that, you know, what else can we do with that? Do we get connotations of words? Do we get tonality? Do we get all of the stuff that
yeah,
we, again, in the voice industry have been saying, it would be really cool if we can do this someday? Do we start getting that? Is this the
yeah.
year that we get it or not? I don't know.
I'm not sure. And I think kind of that plays into this whole thing, and not necessarily that there's a lot of latency per se with going to these models that are hosted in the cloud, but if we can get the models small enough and still good enough to be hosted on device, then you can take out, another place where there is latency, and just removing as much of that as possible. Um, or just even getting them to work, offline, and in
Sure.
other cases. So
Well,
that's kind of another area that I'm looking at, is, running these things on device, running them local, whether that's a phone, that's a Raspberry Pi, that's a, whatever.
and you know the companies want to be pushing things on device because
Yeah.
they're paying ridiculous amounts to host these things. If they can make you essentially pay for it with your phone, with your, you know, device in your house, with whatever,
Yeah.
they would love that. You know, so and we're starting to see that. You know, Google announced as part of Gemini one of the models that is going to be available on Pixel 8s real soon now.
All right.
Is their nano version. And as we touched base last time, Apple has announced that they've got a paper out on how to do some of this stuff locally.
Yep.
So you're definitely, and you know, certainly every time Llama announces something, and every time, you know, the open source models get released, people are talking about running it on device.
Yeah.
So that's an exciting world. I think the real question is going to end up being just how good they are, how useful they are, and how we use them. You know,
Yeah.
because again, I feel like, and this is probably one of the things that I see as the bigger notion here, is it's great to have a large language model that, will will help you write a poem that you could use for a podcast, or write limericks as a pirate or whatever. That's cool. but I think one of the things we're going to see more and more this year is, okay, how do we use the models um, in smaller fashions? And do we need huge models for those sorts of things? So, how do we use a model as a personal agent
Yeah,
to understand us better? How do we use it to follow our commands, in a more intelligent way than intents were? Kind of intent like,
yeah,
but better. How do we start to bring out the Jarvis conversations
yeah,
that
exactly. And what I'm thinking on those lines is that, you know, with using, function calling or agents, yeah, we can get the functionality to be similar to how we have intents. But one of the challenges of intents is that there was an intent, your utterance mapped to an intent.
right,
Whereas if your utterance can map to one or more function calls, you could say, "Oh, I need to, um, find products that are blue, shoes that are blue that are in size 3." So there might, and then order them or something like that. Maybe that's your whole utterance. So the find would take these different parameters and actually do the search, get the list of results back, and then it could generate what the conversation it needed to be to get to the point where confirm which one you want, and you order it, and it actually makes the API call to do the ordering. That that seems to, handle more complexity of conversation than the simple intent, utterance to
yes,
intent mapping.
absolutely. And then when you start pairing it, can we then add that to the voice agents so
Yeah,
we can have that ambient, ubiquitous conversation? But on the other hand, I don't know. I don't know if we're going to see ambient, ubiquitous computing going anywhere in the next year. You know, Google,
yep,
Google, yes, they've announced, uh, Assistant with Bard, and there
yeah,
are rumors of this Google Pixie agent that's going to be running on device on Pixels. But is there a third party story to be had with those?
yeah.
And my fear is the answer is going to be no.
That we're getting more kind of to the,
Right,
closed systems. Yeah,
right. We know that Alexa is coming out with their LLM suite this year. At least we hope they are.
yeah,
But how much of that is going to be skills as we've known them,
yeah,
and how much is going to be a more limited, locked down environment?
yeah. So are things going to be, more and more so that, more and more siloed so that they're one first party 1P experiences, and that developers are locked out of that world now. That part of the advantage and the draw of building something on like an Alexa is that um, there's millions and millions of devices out there, and if you can get the right audience to know that your app or skill functionality is present, then you can get a wide audience. And getting a device into somebody's home is harder than getting them to click on a link to for a web app or download an app in the app
Right.
mobile app store.
And then, and this is the conversation we keep coming back to, even if there is a third party for this, what's the monetization story?
Yes,
Because nobody is talking about that.
yeah. Is it something where companies and dev teams can survive financially with putting the effort there? Is the upside big enough for organizations to pay the money
Right.
to do that?
I
Yep,
mean, OpenAI, when they announced GPTs, which was
yep,
the nearest thing they had, they said there was going to be revenue sharing, but there's a lot of unknowns behind what
yeah,
that is going to mean. So I think that's the big unanswered question of all of this LLM stuff is how does anybody make money, and who is?
yeah. And if these models are running on device and no longer in the cloud, then what's the mechanism to to charge for
Right.
that, right?
And maybe it reduces back to our previous app model,
Yeah.
which that's fine. That's worked for some people, but lots of questions
Yeah.
that I'm excited to see how we answer, and I'm excited to be part of the conversations about answering it.
Yes.
And I really hope the companies that are building these things are actually having the conversations. And I really want them back in voice agents. It really was the right approach, and I really think we can. I won't say this is the year,
Yeah.
but I would love it if by the end of the year we really, if summer time frame, we saw at least some summer time frame, or when the hardware announcements started coming out in the fall. Really love it if we could start seeing some nice hints about voice agents returning.
Yeah, that would be really, that would be ideal for me, because and then what's the developer story too would be my question right after that. So before we continue on, one of the things that that's interesting to me about this idea of agents, AI agents, or function calling is just the fact that you have more control over what's going on. Um, and you can still be in control of what the response is going to be. So maybe you do make API calls and different things to make things happen, whether it's smart home or other things. But then you can still be in charge of what the response is going to be. You can either generate the response, or you can serve up the response that you care about.
Well, who's the you in that case?
I guess the developer,
Okay.
organization, the designer of the bot can
Well,
have control over that, because with LLMs, yes, you can use it to generate something, or you can say this is the world of things, that is the data that you care about, and these are the documents that are important to our company, and so now you have frequently asked questions about the company. But in that case, you're just turning over the output to the LLMs. I'm interested in a world where LLMs could help me in the natural language processing part of things, um, and be able to call functions, and as a developer still be able to call whatever APIs or things that need to happen
right,
for that,
right.
and then still control what the output is, and not hand that output over to the LLM as
And
well.
I think we see that already with retrieval augmented generation type systems.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to get a better understanding of how to build those better and better
Yeah.
as we go along. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that this year. I think one of the real challenges is going to be if we are talking about function calling and agents, is how much we get away from that app model and towards a function model, so that our voice agent, which is
Mhm.
our agent, which is not an app that anyone has written. It's an extension of Alexa or Assistant or
Yeah.
whoever. How much it goes and makes the function calls for us, cutting apps out of the picture completely.
That is interesting.
Where it starts adopting more of the Bixby model.
Yeah.
And once you start doing that, well, okay, what are the implications there?
Yeah.
And again, what are the implications for monetization?
Yes.
And I don't know.
Yeah. And if what would have been your app had functions A, B, and C, and they worked really well together, and you packaged them up in a certain way, then that still may be possible. But what if you serve up A and C, and something else serves up B now, because that's the user's preference? Then that might, that might be better for the user. It may
Right.
not be, because it may not work as well together as if you had,
And maybe that's what apps become, is instead of, the user interface, that apps really just become the API interface.
maybe.
Maybe that would be, so in order to get access to my APIs, you install my app.
Yeah.
I don't know. That would be interesting.
Yeah. Maybe it's more of a delivery package mechanism then.
Yeah. So, tons and tons of interesting options. Then if we begin to scratch the surface on those this
Yeah.
year, I'll be excited.
Yes. Agreed.
I think the other thing that I know we're just beginning to see that, and I think we're going to see so much more of with these LLMs, and this is why I say LLMs are being a or a
Yeah.
misnomer, because we're going beyond language. We're going to start
Yeah.
seeing video input and image input and output of all of these things. And CAD, I saw last week, you can now have these models generating CAD outputs and 3D synthesis and
Yeah.
regenerating music, and there's all sorts of ways to now take different media, combine them together for both input and output. I think when we saw OpenAI start to be able to produce images along with text on its output, and we hear that Gemini was not just trained on language and images separately, but it's a unified model that can now take images and video and text mixed together. We'll see where all of this goes.
Yeah.
I think there, I don't know where it's going to end up, but there are a bunch of interesting places it could. I mean, I can now legitimately see it saying, instead of, we talked about less latency on streaming text, so you could turn that into streaming audio. What if it just starts streaming audio directly?
Yep.
That's a native output of it. What if, on some devices it'll print it out, but also print out context buttons that you could click on? That's a native part of the output. What does that mean?
Yeah, exactly.
But I think we'll see more of that over the coming year.
Yeah.
And I'm excited.
Yeah, because
I'm excited to see what Gemini does.
Yeah, and Gemini, and there's definitely there are some special purpose multimodal models or multimedia models, however you want to call them. But and there are more of these combined models, but you've seen the improvement of quality in just image generation in the last
Yes.
year already. There's text to image creation, but there's also image to video where you can take an image and then have it animated into a video. I've seen things where you can make like animated storyboards or comic strips or.
And you know what? But I feel like I want to not so much rein it in, but I want to call that into question, because you and I agreed just a few minutes ago that while it's exciting to see it telling stories like a pirate, the exciting thing to us is letting us do things, real things. And so while I feel like image generation is nice, I can have it create portraits of people that actually only have 5 fingers on a hand now. That's nice. But what and certainly in some fields this is important. This is good. It's upending advertising. It's going to be upending some other places where we're using stock photos. But so what? How can I get it to generate an image that better illustrates this data than a simple pie chart? Will it be able to generate music? Will it be able to generate audio that can better highlight the sales report? And those are almost silly in some ways, but how do we get what multimodal output will help us to do things better? And I don't have an answer to that yet.
Yeah, because there's still this whole range of AI in tools that are going to make workers, knowledge workers, whatever, better because they're using these tools, or do things faster, be another tool in their belt to get things done.
Well, I would even say go beyond knowledge workers. If I am currently, if I am repairing a car, I've got a static manual for it. Okay. And one of the things that people used to love to talk about is that manual is now going to be on a tablet and it's going to be animated. Okay. how do I, use that information now and create a dynamically generated movie that illustrates what I want to do? Is that possible? Is that feasible? Is that reasonable? Is that what I want?
Yeah.
What are the, pictures of people that don't exist are cool? Synthetically aging, projecting what, Einstein would have looked like had he lived to the age of 200. Cool, I guess. But what's the practical use of this?
Yeah.
Show, and I don't know that we're going to get that this year.
Yeah. I think
that's my blue sky, but I don't think we'll get there. And I feel like we're still, the hype cycle of AI is still rising. We're not yet at the, we're not past the this is cool phase.
Yeah, I think you're right on that. I think there's lots that are, it's kind of exploring what it can do, improving the quality of what it started to do, branching out to multiple media forms with different inputs and different outputs. So I think there's going to still be a lot of growth in 2024 as far as what can these things do? Why do I care? What's available?
I think the why do I care is the important part.
Yeah.
And I think some of that's going to be tempered, at least I hope it is, by regulations that I'm sure are also coming this year. In some ways as developers, that's outside, that's a higher pay grade than mine, but we need to pay attention to it because it behooves us to make sure we understand what's going on and we live within the regulations, because the regulations are there because people want to make sure these systems are protecting their jobs, their safety, their privacy.
Yeah. And and as consumers that are using these types of tools or things that have AI embedded in them now, we can speak up. If there's something that we don't like, we can speak up against the companies and let our voices be heard to the companies. We can vote with our dollars and either purchase or not purchase things. And when it goes into the realm of local, state, and federal law, we can let our voices be heard to our representatives as well as with the things that are important to us and things that we're concerned about.
Exactly. And I think as engineers, it is our responsibility to bring our knowledge, our industry knowledge, to make sure that as we're integrating AI into these systems, that the safety measures that we've made sure have been in them are still in them.
Yeah.
That just be, that we're not just handing everything over to an AI to deal with. We are still building into these systems the things that we have always considered important.
And where regulations haven't been, and there are questions about where this data is coming from and bias on stuff. It's up to us as developers to say this is a line we're not crossing.
Absolutely,
because it's probably going to hit us before it is official. Well, in a number of cases. Yeah,
I think it's our obligation again as engineers. There's always been this notion, this debate of is programming an art, a science, or an engineering field? And this is a case where we have to put the engineer hats on and say, we are assessing the risks.
Yeah.
And we are helping management assess the risks. And here's our assessment.
Yep.
But I think there's cool stuff coming.
There is. And I think when this time hits next year and we're looking back, I think we're going to have a lot to talk about and a lot of new things that we've learned and probably some additional cautions.
I hope this year, definitely agree. It's going to be an exciting year. So let's hold on. And we'll be spending the next 50 or so weeks covering it and talking about it and exploring it with you on Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs.
Take care, Mark.
Yep. Thank you, Alan. You take care too.